this is a tricky subject, and there's obviously enough stress when you're selling a property, but to also unfortunately have a relationship breakdown, it's just piles it on, doesn't it? Two very big milestones in your life.
It absolutely does, Sophie and James. It's one of those situations where selling your own home is highly emotional anyway, but when you're dealing with the aftermath of a separation, there's so many more layers of complexity that come into it. It is very easy for people to get stuck, to be unable to make decisions, to get caught up in conflict and emotion, and to not move forward.
Now, what are the main challenges that people are facing at that time?
Well, in particular, depending on the circumstances, as I said, there could be highly emotional. There could be conflict in the relationship, so animosity of some sort that prevents people from wanting to liaise and deal with each other to get an outcome. There can often be an imbalance in financial knowledge. You know, it could be that one partner's been responsible for all the money and finances and the other partner hasn't. So depending on the situation, they may be wary or mistrusting of any proposal that's put in front of them. And often third parties have negative influence, albeit well-meaning. So family and friends can actually interject, and that can also cause confusion and make it very difficult for people to move forward and know what direction and what path to take. So never underestimate the complexity of dealing with property under a separation, and then it's a case of really, under those circumstances, trying to take that emotion and that stress out of it and seek independent support. And generally I'd recommend people look at bringing on an independent vendor advocate to support them.
It's you know, already a lot of stress, and under stress all of us can make silly mistakes. What do you think some of the biggest mistakes that people are you know, make when they're dealing with this situation?
Yeah, look, I've seen people not know which agent to pick, not know how to sell their property, not know when to sell their property. One of the biggest bugbears is they often feel like they're going to come out of the situation with substantially less money than what they're accustomed to. So they really do get stuck on setting a particular price expectation, which may not be realistic and in keeping with the market. And if they don't adapt to the market at the time, they can actually find, again, they don't sell, they stay stuck and they can't move forward in their life to have a fresh start.
Now, obviously, the most common thing that people do when they're splitting up is sell the house. You know, we know that one of the main reasons for selling houses is death, divorce, and debt. So, what do couples need to consider when they're doing this in a soft market?
Yeah, well, certainly in a soft market or a declining market. I worked recently with a couple that was splitting, and from the time that we had appraised the property and consulted on the campaign and how it was going to roll out, the market had probably dropped 100,000 in that time. Unfortunately, one of the vendors was highly emotional. We had the opportunity to bring forward a really good offer before auction, knowing that there was very little interest in the property. Certainly one party accepted the offer, but unfortunately the other party didn't. And it unfortunately went to auction and it passed in, and then a further offer a week or so later came in for absolutely 100,000 less than what we were able to secure before the auction. So that was a really expensive lesson, because that vendor was just highly emotional and mistrusting. She just wasn't prepared to listen to advice.
How do you find, Miriam? I mean, your job is very much creating relationships and you know, trust between yourself and your clients, but when there's not necessarily transparency or trust between them, that's really a huge amount of pressure on you then to sort of keep everything moving, trying to see the light at the end of the tunnel, which maybe they can't see.
Absolutely. So we work collaboratively with our clients. We work with a lot of family law firms who introduce us, and we basically walk that fine line between both vendors to stay neutral, to keep them both fully informed, to build trust in the relationship, because at the end of it, once we're often able to help them get an outcome in selling the property, then we're able to sit down with them as buyer agents with our expertise to assist them to be able to move forward there, whether it's potentially buying another home or whether it's maybe investing in the market instead if they can't buy the home that they want to live in. So there's absolutely a lot of trust that has to be created in the relationship for, again, people to be able to make good decisions rather than highly emotional decisions, and then move forward and navigate that really emotional, difficult time, again, to be able to make a fresh start.
Yeah, as you say, it is such a highly emotional time. But what are some of the ways that people can reduce conflict and get along as well as they possibly can through such a turbulent time in their lives?
Yeah, well again I'd suggest bring in a third independent party. So bring in a vendor advocate potentially, so that that advocate can introduce them to 2 or 3 potential real estate agents and really guide them on who to select, how to go about marketing the property, what they need to do to maybe make the property presentable for sale. A vendor advocate can help them to assess whether or not the marketing budget is right or if it can be tweaked a little bit. And as a vendor advocate, we sit in the background working with the agent to get the client the best outcome. So it just means that both of the vendors don't necessarily have to engage with each other. Certainly at the auction or if an offer is presented, they both need to make a decision, but we give them the same information. And again, if one party's less financially savvy, we'll explain it to that party so that they're comfortable and they understand why we make the recommendation that we do. Certainly I suggest that, again, in that situation, listen to the agent rather than third-party friends or family who have no expertise necessarily in what the market's doing at the time. And really, again, try and take the emotion out of it and just understand in getting an outcome, even if the market's softening, if you can sell it the higher end of the market softening, then once you get your financial settlement, there's potential to actually buy better in the same market at the same time. So it's just trying to, again, take emotion out of it, have some practical steps in place, work with independent parties to be able to move forward.
I like what you mentioned about having the relationship with them, and then of course once they do split and sell, then they're going to hopefully be able to get back into the market again themselves. So what do you think that you know, what do they need to be considering when they are selling? Because then they end up with whatever they're going to end up with split, and then move to the next stage of their lives.
Yeah, well sometimes it might take time for them to really figure out what they need. It depends if there are children involved, it depends how old the children are, it depends how the care is going to look, if the children are 50-50 split between both parents and then both parents individually need to get accommodation that accommodates children, how long the kids are going to be living with you for. So I often find it's really important to sit down and understand what the needs are moving forward. In some instances it might be best just renting for 12 months to let the dust settle and take the emotion out of it and just let time sort itself out. But it's really then about having a plan on how do you move forward. And one thing I do see is I see too many parties either race out and buy a property that's inappropriate and ill-considered, or consequently a lot of women sit there and do nothing because they've never dealt with the finances before. They don't know where to start, what to buy, how to go about it. They're really vulnerable, and again, they're not considering that future plan. And I've also seen too many women just leave money in the bank account not knowing what to do, and sometimes sit there in the false hope potentially that maybe someone will come along and they'll merge finances and do something together, and often that's an excuse or a justification to not take action because they're fearful of what to do and how to go about it, which is where a good buyer's agent comes in.
Yeah, and look, not to gender stereotype, but broadly speaking, you do sort of see that that's quite common in women. What are some of those mistakes that you see that men typically make in the same circumstances?
Yeah, I think men can sometimes just race out and look to buy an apartment because that's easy. You don't have to maintain it. There's no lawn. You lock and leave it. If you've only got the kids a few days a week, well, you know, you take them off to the park instead of having a backyard. So again, men tend to be more proactive. They tend to take charge and go and take an action. It's not always the best action. I've seen some men buy off the plan apartments and then 2 years later they've actually lost a lot of money and they've got negative equity in their property. So again, that can be ill-considered as well. But men tend to be more proactive doing something, whereas women tend to be a little bit more reserved and a bit stuck. And women are very emotional, you know, they want their own home. So if they feel that they can't buy their own home in the suburb that they're used to where their friends are, often they feel powerless and do nothing, whereas in fact they're probably in a really good position where at a minimum they can still stay in the market, buy a high-performing investment-grade property and at least have their money working for them rather than sitting in the bank doing nothing.
I like the point, Miriam, that you mentioned about you know, being able to watch rather than just park the money and really not make a decision, because sometimes that can affect negatively when the market's changing. What advice do you give for people when they have sold their property now to make the next step?
I beg your pardon, could you just say that last bit again?
What advice can you give to people now that if they've sold their property for them to make the next step? What do you think they should be considering?
Yeah, so take time, sit down, really develop a plan about where you think you'll be in the next 5 to 10 years, whether it's with or without kids or once the kids have left home. It may be that you rent in the area that you're in where the kids go to school until they're old enough and you're in a position to actually go, well, what does my life look now, and how do I need to live, and when the kids are at a home, you know, what will that look like? Could I consider living in a villa or a townhouse in the suburb? Or am I better off investing at a minimum, and then when I'm ready to make my own home buying decision, I can deal with that at the time, sell the property and then reassess. So I think some action is absolutely better than no action, even if you delay it and take your time. But I absolutely encourage people to get independent advice, and in this scenario, which is highly emotional, and I've been through it, so I know it can be messy, you know, really work with a vendor advocate who can transition into the buyer advocacy side with you, because it just makes dealing with one person and having one relationship so much easier.